It was one of those evenings when the city seemed to sigh under the weight of rain. The streets were slick, lights from cars and shops reflected on the wet pavement, and umbrellas moved like tiny moving dots in the distance. People hurried past each other, each trying to escape the drizzle that had turned into a steady downpour. Among them was a man who walked with a certain confidence, his polished shoes splashing lightly against puddles. He was a well-known figure in the business world, a man who built his success through long nights and tough choices. His assistant had just left for the day, and now he was alone, walking toward the parking lot near the city square. The cold air bit at his hands even through his coat. He was ready to get home, maybe pour himself a cup of coffee and forget the world for a while. But as he passed the small coffee shop near the corner, something caught his attention. There, sitting near the doorway under a broken umbrella, was a young girl. She looked no older than her early 20s, her clothes worn and damp, her shoes completely soaked. People stepped around her as if she were invisible. She didn't beg, didn't speak, didn't move much at all. What drew his eyes was not her appearance, but what she was looking at. Across from her stood an old, wooden piano, one of those street pianos placed by local artists to bring some life to the square. The paint was chipped, a few keys were yellowed with time, but it still worked. The man slowed down. Despite the noise of traffic and rain, he noticed how she stared at that piano like it was something sacred, something she longed for but couldn't reach. He hesitated for a moment, unsure why he cared, but curiosity won over. He stepped closer, the sound of his shoes echoing softly. "You like the piano?" he asked in a polite, almost formal tone. The girl looked up, startled. For a second, she didn't say anything, just blinked away the rainwater from her lashes. Then she nodded slowly. "I used to," she said in a small voice. "You used to?" he repeated, folding his arms. "You mean you played before?" Her eyes drifted back to the piano. "A long time ago," she murmured, "before things got different." The man glanced at her, noticing how her fingers moved slightly, as if remembering a tune. There was something delicate about her, something that didn't quite fit with the harshness of the street. "You know," he said with a faint smirk, "if you can actually play that thing, I might just buy you dinner." It was meant as a light joke, a careless comment tossed into the air. He didn't expect her to react. But instead of laughing or refusing, she lifted her head, her eyes meeting his with a quiet seriousness. "Really?" she asked softly. That single word surprised him. He didn't know what to say for a second. "Sure," he replied with a shrug. "If you can play, I'll feed you." The girl stood slowly, brushing off her wet clothes. She approached the piano carefully, almost as if afraid it might disappear. The few people nearby barely noticed as she lifted the cover, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the keys. The man watched, half amused, half curious. He expected random noise, maybe a clumsy attempt at a tune. But when she pressed the first note, everything changed. A soft, clear sound echoed through the air. Then another, and another. Her fingers began to move, and before long, a melody poured out that made people stop in their tracks. It was beautiful, full of emotion and life, like something you'd hear in a concert hall, not on a rainy street corner. Her hands moved faster, more confident with each note, as if the rain and cold no longer existed. The tune told a story, of hope, of loss, of someone who had lived through too much and still found something worth feeling. The man stood frozen, unable to look away. Slowly, others gathered around. A couple paused under their umbrella. An old man stopped his bicycle. Even the barista from the coffee shop came outside to listen. The small crowd formed naturally, drawn by something raw and honest. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the sound faded into the night like a sigh. For a moment there was silence. Then someone clapped and others joined in. Coins began to drop near her feet, though she didn't seem to care. She looked down at her hands, almost in disbelief that she had done it. The man stepped closer, his usual businesslike tone softened. "That was unexpected," he said quietly. She looked up with a faint, tired smile. "I just missed playing. she whispered. He wanted to ask her more. How she ended up here, how someone with that kind of skill was sleeping on the streets. But something about her expression stopped him. She didn't look for pity. She looked like someone who had already accepted too much pain. "Come on," he said finally, nodding toward the cafe. "I owe you dinner." She hesitated, as if unsure he meant it, but he waited patiently. At last, she stood and followed him inside. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around them as they entered. The other customers glanced curiously, but no one said anything. They sat near the window. The waiter brought them menus, and the man noticed how carefully she read each line, as though afraid to order too much. "Get whatever you want," he said kindly. "You earned it." She smiled a little and ordered something simple, a bowl of soup and bread. As she ate, he asked her name. She told him softly, then lowered her eyes again, shy and cautious. "So you used to play professionally?" he asked. "I was learning," she said, "at a music school. I wanted to become a pianist. But my mom got sick and I had to drop out. After she passed away, I couldn't keep up with rent. Everything just slipped away." The man listened, his chest tightening slightly. He was used to numbers, deals, and deadlines, but not stories like this. There was something real in her voice, something no business deal could replace. "You're talented," he said after a pause. "More than you think." She gave a small, humble smile. "Thank you. I just haven't had a piano to play in a long time." When the food was gone, he paid the bill and they stepped outside. The rain had slowed to a mist, the city lights glimmering across puddles. She turned to him, unsure what to say. "Thank you for the meal," she said quietly. "It's been a while since someone was kind." He nodded, not knowing what to reply. He watched as she walked toward the end of the street, her figure small under the dull glow of a street lamp. She looked back once and smiled before disappearing around the corner. For a moment he stood there, staring at the piano. The keys still wet from rain, but somehow they seemed alive, like they had just shared a secret. As he walked back to his car, her melody kept replaying in his mind. It wasn't just music, it was something that stayed with him, something that tugged quietly at a place he hadn't felt in years. He drove home, but the sound of the piano followed him all night. Even as he lay in bed, the memory of that rainy evening played on repeat. The girl, the song, the way she smiled through her struggle. It wouldn't fade. He didn't know it yet, but that single moment on the street was about to change both of their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. The night after the rain stopped, the city woke up to a calm, clear morning. The puddles from last night's storm still shimmered under the streetlights, and the air smelled fresh, almost peaceful. For most people, it was just another day, rushing to work, grabbing coffee, catching buses. But for one man, the memory of that rainy encounter wouldn't leave his mind. He sat in his office near the window, staring at the skyline, but his thoughts kept circling back to the girl who played the piano in the rain. The melody she had played still echoed faintly in his head. It wasn't just music. It carried emotion, the kind that made a person pause and listen without realizing why. He had met thousands of people in his life, investors, employees, business partners, but very few left an impression. That girl did. Her calmness, her broken smile, and that haunting tune had somehow touched something he thought he had lost a long time ago, the ability to feel beyond the numbers and profits. As he looked out at the busy streets below, he found himself wondering where she might be now. Did she find a place to sleep? Did she have enough to eat? He had done his part. Bought her dinner and left her with a little kindness, but something inside told him that wasn't enough. Meanwhile, down the same street where they had met, the old piano still stood by the cafe. The rain had washed away the dirt on its surface, and a faint rainbow shimmered across the wet keys. The morning sun warmed the wooden frame, and a few children tapped random notes as they passed by, laughing at the sounds. Around noon, the girl returned. Her clothes were still worn, her shoes still torn at the edges, but her eyes had a quiet glow. She looked different. Not because her situation had changed, but because something inside her had. The night before had reminded her who she was, what she once loved. That single chance to play again had woken something deep in her heart. She sat on the bench before the piano, placed her hands gently on the keys, and closed her eyes. The world around her faded for a moment. Then she began to play. At first it was soft, a simple tune, light and tender. But as her fingers moved, the melody grew stronger, braver, more alive. Each note seemed to float through the air and wrap itself around the people walking by. A woman carrying flowers stopped mid-step. A little boy tugged on his mother's sleeve, pointing at the girl. Even a taxi driver parked his car by the curb just to listen. There was something magical in how she played. It wasn't perfect or polished. It was real. Every note carried a piece of her story. The pain, the loneliness, the memories of her mother teaching her to play when she was a child. The melody had no lyrics, yet it spoke louder than words. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered around. Phones came out, people began recording, and whispers spread through the street. "Who is she?" someone asked. "She's amazing," another replied. But the girl didn't notice any of it. Her eyes were closed, her heart completely inside the music. She didn't see the cameras or the coins being dropped into the piano's open lid. She played as if the world around her didn't exist, as if all that mattered was the sound and the story her fingers were telling. Back in his office, the man's assistant entered with a tablet. "Sir, you need to see this," she said. "Someone just uploaded a video online. A girl playing piano on the street. It's going viral." He frowned slightly. "A girl playing piano?" "Yes," she said, turning the screen toward him. "Here, look." The video showed the same corner, the same old piano, and the same girl he had met the night before. The caption read, "Homeless girl plays piano in the rain, brings people to tears." The clip had thousands of views already, and the comments were filled with admiration. The man leaned forward, watching the screen closely. There she was, her fingers dancing across the keys, her hair slightly damp, her expression calm but filled with feeling. Even through the low-quality phone recording, he could feel that same pull in his chest, that same strange warmth he couldn't explain. "She's talented," he murmured. "Really talented." By the time the video ended, the assistant smiled faintly. "She's trending on every platform, sir. People are asking who she is. Maybe we should find her. It could make a great charity feature for the company's social campaign." He hesitated. He didn't like the idea of turning something so genuine into a publicity stunt. "No," he said quietly. "Not for promotion. But find her. I just want to make sure she's safe." Later that evening, the man left the office early. He walked back to that same street where it all began. The rain had returned, light and steady, coating the piano in a thin shine. But this time, the square wasn't empty. There was a crowd. People stood under umbrellas, clapping as the girl finished her song. She looked surprised by the applause, like she wasn't used to being noticed. Her cheeks flushed as she smiled shyly, bowing her head slightly. When the man stepped forward, she noticed him instantly. "You came back," she said, her voice soft but warm. He nodded, smiling faintly. "I saw your video." The whole city did, actually. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Video?" He pulled out his phone and showed her. Her hands trembled slightly as she watched herself on screen, the comments pouring with love and encouragement. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from something deeper. "I didn't think anyone would care," she whispered. "People care more than you think," he said gently. "You just reminded them what real music feels like." A few of the onlookers approached, offering her coffee, money, even scarves to keep warm. She thanked each one, overwhelmed by the sudden kindness. The man stood nearby, watching quietly. Something about the moment filled him with a strange pride, like he was witnessing a spark turning into a small flame. As the evening went on, she played again. This time, the man stood closer, listening without saying a word. Her music flowed smoother than ever, more confident, more alive. The sound seemed to mix with the patter of rain, creating a rhythm that pulled everyone together. At one point, a little girl in the crowd asked softly, "Why do you play out here?" The homeless girl smiled. Because the world feels kinder when I do. That answer lingered in the air, quiet but powerful. Even the man felt something shift inside him again. For years, he had lived surrounded by luxury. Big offices, expensive dinners, meetings filled with numbers. But right now, standing on a rainy street listening to a girl with nothing but a piano, he felt richer than ever. When she finished, the crowd cheered again. Someone shouted that she should perform on television. Another said she should start a YouTube channel. But she just laughed softly and shook her head. Maybe one day, she said. After the people started to leave, the man approached her again. You shouldn't be out here in this weather, he said kindly. Let me help you find a better place, at least for tonight. She hesitated. You've already done enough, she said. You gave me dinner. You listened. That's more than most people do. He looked at her for a long moment. Sometimes people need a chance, he said. You deserve one. She looked down, then gave a small nod. Maybe someday, she whispered. As the rain thickened, the man handed her his umbrella and turned to leave, promising to check back again. She watched him walk away, holding the umbrella like a fragile gift. Then she turned back to the piano and pressed a single note. Soft, lonely, yet full of promise. The city lights flickered in puddles as the sound faded into the night. That melody would travel far beyond that corner. Into hearts, into phones, into homes. Reminding people everywhere that beauty can come from the most unexpected places. And for the man who once made that small joke, if you can play, I'll feed you. It was the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. A moment that would soon grow into a story the whole world would hear. The evening air carried the scent of roasted coffee and rain-soaked earth. The lights along the city street flickered softly as people hurried home, their reflections stretching across wet pavement. The man stood at the same corner where it had all begun, watching the crowd slowly thin out. And there she was again, the girl by the piano. Her hands rested gently on the keys, but this time she wasn't playing. She was just sitting there, lost in thought, her eyes distant as if trying to hold onto the last notes of a fading song. The man hesitated before stepping closer, unsure what to say. You're still here, he said softly. She looked up and smiled faintly. I like it here, she replied. People listen. The simplicity of her words touched something in him. Most people played for fame or money. She played just to be heard, to remind herself she still existed. He glanced at the small crowd dispersing, the coins in the open piano lid, the tired look in her eyes. Have you eaten today? He asked. She shook her head lightly. Not really. It's fine though. Come on, he said, nodding toward the same cafe nearby. Let's get you something warm. She looked uncertain. You already helped me once, she said quietly. Then let's call this part 2, he replied with a small smile. After a pause, she gave in and followed him inside. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around them instantly, a soft contrast to the chill outside. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. People glanced at them curiously, but no one said anything. The man guided her to a table near the window, where they could see the piano still glistening under the streetlight. She looked out at it with quiet affection, as if leaving an old friend behind. He noticed the way her eyes softened, and for a moment, they sat in silence until the waiter came. Order anything you like, he said gently. She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of the menu. Soup is fine, she murmured. He nodded. And some bread too. When the food came, she ate slowly, carefully, as though savoring each bite. The man watched quietly, realizing just how much a simple meal meant to her. It wasn't pity he felt, it was respect. She carried herself with quiet dignity even when she had nothing. After a few minutes, he finally asked, So, how long have you been playing the piano? She smiled softly, eyes distant. Since I was a child. My mom used to teach music. We had an old piano at home. She said music was the one thing that could make the world stop hurting, even if only for a few minutes. He listened intently. Her words came slow, thoughtful, like someone carefully unwrapping old memories. She used to play while I sat beside her, she continued. When she got sick, I played for her instead. It made her smile, even when she couldn't talk anymore. Her voice grew softer, barely above a whisper. After she passed, I tried to keep going. I got a small scholarship for a music academy. But then the bills, rent, it all caught up. I couldn't keep up anymore. The man didn't interrupt. He just let her speak, the sound of rain tapping softly against the window filling the spaces between her words. When I lost the apartment, I didn't know where else to go, she said. I found that street piano one day by accident. I thought maybe, if I could still play, maybe I hadn't lost everything. The man sat quietly for a moment. He had spent his life chasing numbers, building companies, signing deals. Yet here was someone who had nothing but still carried more grace than most people he knew. You didn't lose everything, he said finally. You still have your gift, and it's worth more than you realize. She looked up, surprised by his tone. A gift doesn't feed you, she said softly. No, he admitted. But it can change your life, if someone gives it a chance. The waiter brought coffee, and for a while they both sat in silence, the steam rising between them like a quiet pause. She smiled faintly, a small, genuine smile that seemed to lighten her face. Thank you, she said, for this, not just the food, for listening. He nodded, touched by her sincerity. You remind me of someone I used to know, he said, someone who believed in small miracles. Do you? She asked. He smiled a little. I used to. Maybe I'm starting to again. She looked down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim gently. I don't think miracles are big things, she said softly. Sometimes it's just a warm meal or someone who cares enough to stop. He didn't have an answer for that, but her words stayed with him. When they finished eating, he paid the bill quietly and stood. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving the street fresh and gleaming under the lamplight. The piano still stood where it always did, a faint reflection of the moon on its surface. Do you have somewhere to go tonight? He asked. There's a shelter not far from here, she said. They let me in sometimes if there's space. He nodded, then reached into his pocket and handed her a folded note. Here, he said, just for food or anything you need. No strings attached. She looked hesitant. I can't take that. You can, he said firmly. Think of it as a loan. You can pay it back one day, maybe with another song. That made her laugh softly, the kind of laugh that sounded like it had been hiding for a long time. All right, she said. Deal. She took the note and tucked it carefully into her pocket. For a moment, they both stood there, unsure how to end the night. Will you be here tomorrow? He asked. She shrugged. If no one takes the piano away. I hope you are, he said. People need to hear you play. She smiled again, the light catching her eyes. Good night, she said. Good night. He watched her walk toward the corner, her small figure fading into the dim glow of the street. When she turned once to wave, he raised a hand back. Then she was gone. The man stood there a while longer, the melody she played earlier still lingering in his head. It had become a part of him now, like a quiet tune he couldn't turn off. When he finally drove home, the city looked different. Not just brighter, but somehow softer. The people rushing past, the lights blinking in the distance. Even the rain-soaked streets all felt more human. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying her words in his mind. About her mother, the music, and the small miracles. He realized that in his busy life, he had forgotten what kindness felt like when it had no purpose behind it. He opened his laptop and searched for her video again. It had spread even more, thousands of people had commented, sharing how her music touched their hearts. Some wrote that it reminded them of their childhood. Others said it brought tears to their eyes. Scrolling through the messages, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe this wasn't just about helping one girl. Maybe it was about giving her and others like her a real chance. He looked at the company website on his screen, then at a folder labeled charity programs. It had been inactive for months, used more for publicity than passion. For the first time in years, he wanted to use it for something real. He leaned back in his chair and smiled faintly. A chance, he murmured to himself. That's all she needs. The next morning he made a few calls, setting things in motion. He didn't know exactly how it would work yet. Maybe a scholarship, maybe sponsorship for young street performers. But he knew one thing, he wasn't done with her story. Meanwhile, the girl woke up at the shelter, holding the note he had given her the night before. She smiled as she looked at it, not because of the money, but because of what it meant. Someone believed she was worth helping. Before heading out, she whispered quietly, "Maybe miracles do come in small pieces." And as the sun rose over the city, she made her way back toward the piano. Not to beg, not to survive, but to play. Because for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a reason to. The morning sunlight peeked through the clouds, painting soft gold lines over the city streets. The sound of footsteps, honking cars, and chatter filled the air as another day began. The same street corner where the old piano stood looked different now. It wasn't just a forgotten instrument anymore. People stopped there often, hoping to see the girl who played so beautifully that she had once made strangers cry in the rain. But that morning the piano was silent. Its surface was still damp from the night dew, and a small puddle reflected the sky beneath its legs. The girl wasn't there. Some of the people who had seen her play whispered that maybe she had left for good, maybe she found a better place. Others hoped she would come back, because her music had become something people looked forward to. Across town, the man sat in his office, his mind wandering even as meetings went on around him. His team discussed numbers and reports, but he barely heard them. All he could think about was the girl and the melody that had somehow changed the rhythm of his own life. It had been 3 days since he last saw her. He had gone back twice to the same spot, but she was nowhere to be found. The piano sat alone, the streets strangely quiet without her presence. He felt an odd emptiness, something he couldn't quite explain. "Sir?" His assistant's voice broke his thoughts. "The music video has gone viral. Over 10 million views already. People are sharing it everywhere." He nodded slowly. "Any luck finding her?" "Not yet," she replied. "But I think we'll find her soon." Some people in the comments mentioned seeing her near the old community center downtown. He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Keep looking," he said softly. "When you find her, let me know immediately." The rest of the day passed in meetings, but his heart wasn't in them. Numbers and presentations felt empty compared to the simple beauty of a girl and her piano. Later that afternoon, a notification popped up on his phone. A new video, a familiar one. The title read, "Homeless Girl Found Again," still playing the same street piano. He clicked instantly. There she was. The same quiet smile, the same gentle movements. This time, the video showed her surrounded by a bigger crowd. She looked different though. A little more confident, her posture straighter, her music even more alive. The comments poured in with love and admiration. People from other cities offered her help. Some musicians asked to collaborate, and a few local schools wanted to sponsor her lessons. He smiled faintly as he watched. "You did it," he murmured, without even trying. But he didn't just want to watch from afar. He wanted to make sure her talent didn't disappear again, swallowed by the streets and forgotten dreams. That evening, he drove to the same corner once more. The piano was still there, glowing faintly under the streetlights. And there she was, playing again, her fingers moving like they were born to live on those keys. The sound was warm and full, filling the space with life. When she finished, the crowd cheered. Some dropped coins, others clapped and asked for another song. She smiled, shy as always, and bowed slightly in thanks. When she saw him standing by the edge of the crowd, she froze for a moment, surprised. "You came back," she said, smiling faintly. "I told you I would," he replied. "I've been looking for you." She tilted her head, confused. "Looking for me?" He nodded. "You've become famous, you know. Millions of people have seen your video. They love your music." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Millions?" He smiled. "You've touched more people than you think. And now, there are people who want to help you. Really help you." She didn't know what to say. For a moment, she just stood there, trying to process everything. "I don't even know what to do with that," she whispered. Let me help you, he said softly. My company has a foundation that supports talent. I want to give you a scholarship. Lessons, instruments, a place to live. Everything you need to start again. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. You'd do that for me? He nodded. You earned it. You reminded people what music really feels like. Tears welled in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he said with a gentle smile. She laughed quietly, still in disbelief. All right, she whispered. Yes. The next few days felt like a dream to her. For the first time in years, she had a roof over her head. The company arranged for a small apartment near the music school and covered her tuition. When she walked into the academy for the first time, her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from joy. The halls smelled of polished wood and sheet music, the sound of students practicing echoing through the walls. She sat at a grand piano in one of the practice rooms, her reflection shining on the black surface. When she played, the sound filled the room, clear, full of heart. A teacher passing by stopped to listen. You've been trained before, the teacher said after a few minutes. The girl nodded. A long time ago. Then you haven't lost it, the teacher said kindly. You just needed to find your way back. Those words stayed with her. She practiced every day, sometimes late into the night, her fingers sore but her heart full. Each note reminded her how far she'd come. From sleeping on cold sidewalks to sitting here, playing in a real studio again. Meanwhile, the man checked in often. Not because he wanted credit, but because he truly cared. Every time he saw her progress, he felt a quiet pride he couldn't describe. One evening, he visited the academy unannounced. She was practicing, her eyes closed, completely lost in the rhythm. He stood at the doorway, listening, not wanting to disturb her. When she finally noticed him, she smiled. You still come to listen? She asked playfully. I can't stay away, he admitted. Your music reminds me why I started helping people in the first place. She laughed softly. Maybe that's my way of paying you back. He shook his head. You already did. The world needed to hear your story. Weeks turned into months, and her talent grew. One day, she received an invitation from a local concert hall, a charity event for young musicians. They wanted her to perform the closing piece, the same melody she once played in the rain. When she told the man, he was quiet for a long moment. You're ready, he said finally. The world's going to remember that song. She smiled, nervous but excited. I'll make sure they remember the kindness behind it too. The night of the concert arrived. The stage lights were bright, and the seats were filled with people. The man sat among them, quietly watching as she walked out, wearing a simple white dress. She looked nothing like the girl he'd met on that rainy night. Yet somehow, she was still the same at heart. When she sat down and began to play, the hall fell silent. The melody started softly, like a whisper. Then it grew, rising with emotion and depth that filled every corner of the room. People leaned forward, holding their breath as if afraid to miss a single note. And when she finished, the hall erupted in applause. Some stood, others wiped their eyes. She stood, bowing deeply, tears glistening in her own eyes. Among the crowd, the man smiled proudly. He knew this was just the beginning. Later that night, after the concert, she found him near the stage. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. He shook his head. Don't thank me. You did this. You just needed a door to open. She smiled warmly. Then thank you for opening it. They both laughed softly. The night was calm, the city lights glowing outside the windows. As they stepped out of the hall, she looked up at the sky and whispered, It's strange, isn't it? One small act of kindness can change an entire life. He nodded. And sometimes, it changes too. They stood there for a while in silence, the echoes of her music still drifting through the air. A melody that had started on a rainy street and now lived in the hearts of thousands. The second chance she once thought she'd never get had finally found her. And it all began with a simple promise. If you can play the piano, I'll feed you. The night after the concert, the city felt quieter than usual. The streets glowed under the soft light of the lamps, and a cool wind carried the faint hum of distant traffic. Inside her small apartment, the girl sat by the window, still wearing the same dress from her performance. Her heart was full, but her mind was racing. Everything that had happened in the last few months felt unreal, like a story she had dreamed up while sleeping on the cold pavement long ago. She looked at her reflection in the glass. The same eyes stared back, but they no longer looked tired. There was light in them now, the kind that only comes after pain and perseverance. Her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up to find hundreds of new messages. Some were from strangers who had seen her concert online, some from musicians who wanted to collaborate, and a few from people who said her story had inspired them to chase their own dreams again. She read them all slowly, smiling to herself. She remembered the night she met the man. The rain, the hunger, the piano, the laughter. Back then, she had no idea that moment would change everything. A knock came at the door. When she opened it, the man stood there holding a bouquet of white lilies. "You did it," he said simply. She laughed softly. "You always say that." He smiled. "Because you keep proving me right." He handed her the flowers. "These are from the staff at the Music Academy. They're proud of you." She took them, her eyes shining. "Please come in," she said. He stepped inside, looking around the small but cozy apartment. It was clean and warm, a stark contrast to how things had been when they first met. There were music sheets scattered on the table, a small keyboard near the wall, and a few photos from her concert framed on a shelf. "You've built a home," he said quietly. She nodded. "I think I finally have one." They sat together for a while, talking about the concert and everything that had followed. The girl shared how her teachers were encouraging her to record her first album, and how some charity organizations wanted her to become their ambassador to help other struggling artists. He listened with genuine happiness. "You deserve all of it," he said. She smiled, but her tone turned thoughtful. "You know, sometimes I still go back to that old street corner. The piano's still there." He looked surprised. "Really? After everything, you still go back?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, I don't want to forget where it started. That piano saved me in a way. When I sit there, I remember what it feels like to have nothing but hope. It reminds me to stay humble." The man smiled softly. "That's why people love you. You haven't changed." She looked down, tracing the edge of a flower petal. "I don't ever want to. The world can be cold sometimes, but there's always someone willing to be kind. You were that person for me." He shook his head. "No," he said. "You gave me something too. You reminded me that success means nothing if you lose compassion along the way." The words hung in the air for a moment. It was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, the kind that comes from shared gratitude. After a while, she turned to him and said, "There's something I want to do. Concert. Not in a big hall, not for famous people. I want to perform on that same street, the place where it all began. I want to play for those who don't have much, just like I once didn't." He looked at her, thoughtful. "You're serious?" She nodded. "Yes, I want to remind others that even when you're at your lowest, beauty can still be found. Sometimes in the most unexpected places." He smiled. "Then let's make it happen." In the weeks that followed, preparations began. The man used his connections to help set things up, but the girl insisted on keeping it simple. No fancy stage, no expensive lights, just her, the piano, and the people. Flyers were printed, volunteers gathered, and slowly word spread across the city. The day finally arrived. The same street corner looked alive again. The old piano had been cleaned, repainted, and decorated with soft string lights. People began gathering, some who remembered her from the first time, others who had only heard about her story online. The man stood near the back, watching as she sat down at the piano. The evening sun dipped behind the buildings, painting the sky with orange and pink. She looked around at the faces before her. Some smiling, some curious, some carrying the same weary look she once had. She took a deep breath, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The sound was soft at first, like a whisper, but it grew, filling the street with warmth and emotion. Her melody danced through the air, weaving between the buildings and into the hearts of everyone listening. People stopped walking. Cars slowed down. The world, for a moment, seemed to pause just to listen. As she played, she remembered everything. The rain that night, the hunger, the laughter, the first note that changed her fate. Each key she pressed told a piece of her story, and each sound carried a message of hope. Tears glistened in the eyes of strangers. Some smiled through them, others closed their eyes to simply feel. When she finished, there was silence. Not because they didn't want to clap, but because they were still lost in the moment. Then, slowly, the applause began, growing louder until it echoed through the whole street. The girl stood, bowing deeply. Her eyes met the man's in the crowd. He smiled, his eyes full of pride. She took the microphone and spoke softly, her voice trembling slightly. Not long ago, I was sitting right here, cold and hungry. I didn't think anyone even saw me. But one person did. He stopped, listened, and believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. That one act of kindness gave me a new life. She looked at the man who lowered his head humbly. She continued, "So tonight, I don't just play music. I play for those who are still out there, waiting for someone to see them. I play to remind everyone that kindness matters. That hope is never truly lost." The crowd erupted in applause again. Some came forward, offering hugs and kind words. Reporters took photos, children clapped, and even a few elderly people stood wiping tears. The man walked up to her after the performance. "You did it again," he said softly. She smiled. "This time we did it." They sat together on the curb, watching the crowd slowly leave. The piano stood quiet again, but it looked different now. Not lonely, but proud. After a while, she looked at him and said, "Do you think I'll ever be able to pay back what you did for me?" He shook his head. "You already have. You're doing for others what I did for you. Maybe even more." She smiled at that, her eyes soft. "Then maybe this is just the beginning." The man nodded. "It always is. Every act of kindness starts another one. That's how the world changes. Quietly, one person at a time." The night deepened, the crowd thinned, and the city lights flickered on. She placed her hand gently on the piano. "Funny," she said. "I used to think this piano was just a way to survive. Now it feels like my way to give back." He smiled. "Sometimes the things we cling to in pain become the things that heal others." They sat there for a long time, saying nothing. The breeze carried the faint sound of laughter and music from nearby streets. Life moved on, but something had shifted. In her, in him, and maybe even in everyone who had heard her story. Eventually, she stood, brushing the dust off her dress. "Come on," she said with a grin. "Let's go get something to eat. I owe you dinner." He laughed. "You've been feeding souls all night. I think you've done enough." She shook her head, smiling warmly. "No, this time, I'll feed you." They both laughed as they walked down the street together, side by side. Behind them, the piano stood quietly under the streetlights, glowing faintly. A silent reminder of a promise once made on a rainy night. Promise that changed two lives forever. And as the city settled into its rhythm, one melody lingered in the air, gentle, timeless, full of hope.